Hello and welcome to today's A-Team Group webinar on regulatory change management, challenges, solutions and case studies. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor here at A-Team Group and I'm going to monitor today's webinar. Our expert speakers today are Linda Kaufman, Executive Vice President of the Reference Data Utility at SmartStream, Jamie Walsh, Senior Director of Product Marketing at SAI 360, Rabia Anwar, Partner at Keystone Law, and Colin Ware, Regulatory Product Manager at BNY Mellon. I'll ask them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but meantime, just a few housekeeping tips for you. On your screen to the right of the video, you'll see a panel for polls and a panel for questions. We'll be running 3 audience polls today, so you'll see the polls there as they come along. So please do vote in those and we can gather some of your opinion on some of the issues we're talking about. In terms of the questions, please ask any questions you'd like to ask to the speakers as we go along. We'll take them as we go along and not leave them to the end. So post up your questions as and when you want to, and we'll answer as many as we can. So let me come back to our speakers. And Linda, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in regulatory change management.
Hi there, Linda Kaufman, Executive Vice President at SmartStream Technologies. I'm currently responsible for running the Reference Data Utility, which we refer to as RDU, and we offer a number of regulatory products. So I've been kind of, in the mix of regulation for the last couple of years, and very happy to be here today to discuss with the panel about regulatory change.
Thank you. Over to you, Jamie.
My name is Jamie Walsh, and I've been with SAI Global now for about 10 years. Spanning across a number of different risk disciplines, including compliance risk and how regulatory change fits into that.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And over to you, Rabia.
Hi, everyone. I am Rabia Anwar. I'm a partner at Keystone Law. I'm a solicitor, an advocate and attorney. I've specialized in financial services regulation for about 15 years and very happy to be here with everyone today.
Thank you. And over to you, Colin.
Yeah, hi, I'm Colin Ware from BNY Mellon. I work in our asset servicing division. As I said at the beginning, there I'm a regulatory product manager. So really my role is to help our clients with regulations and find services and solutions that can help them meet their regulatory obligations. But looking forward to the panels today.
Thank you very much indeed to all of you. And let's get started with an audience poll question, which you will be able to see, as I said earlier, to the right of your screen. The question is, how does your organization expect the pace of regulatory change to alter over the next 5 years? While you mull on that one over, let me come to Jamie to set the scene and share his views on how he expects the pace of regulatory change to alter going forward.
Yeah, so I do believe it's continuing to increase in the pace, and I expect that to continue and in fact slowly increase even faster. A lot of the regulation that we see is driven by societal criticism, and a lot of that seems to be happening much faster, due to social media and events being live streamed across the world, and people are becoming a lot more vocal and loud, and really using the governments to really help shape the way the world is. And some of that criticism is shared by employees and customers, not just shareholders. And because of that, you're seeing organizations wanting to be a little bit more proactive, not just to avoid higher costs, but also because it is just simply good business, for shareholders, for employees alike. So,
okay, thanks, Rabia. What would you add there in terms of the pace at which we're going?
I think I'd agree with Jamie that the pace is definitely picking up, and I think next year we're set to see a lot more. And I think the reason is that in general, the pace of regulatory change tends to mirror technological innovation, financial product innovation, and also nowadays it also takes into account and mirrors big shifts in society. So if you look at all those different arenas and areas, we're seeing a lot of change in all those ways, and therefore regulation is going to chase to keep up. I also think that in terms of the pace and also the focus of regulation and regulatory change, we'll see a slight shift from solely the classic conduct of business related regulation and prudential risk regulation to also sustainable finance, climate change, much broader areas. So a much wider range of regulation. And then I think the last thing I'd say in terms of what to expect going forwards is potentially some structural changes as well. I think we may see a few new regulatory bodies or organizations cropping up. And I say that not least because we ourselves are working on the launch of a very exciting new regulatory body. It will be a self-regulatory organization focusing on introducing standards and protections specifically for the crypto asset market and for non-fungible tokens. So I think in relation to mirroring the innovation in financial products, we'll see a lot of regulatory change, both new regulations, but also new bodies springing up as well.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to that very much. Let's see what our poll results look like. Okay, Jamie, would you like to comment on that? Is that what you would expect to see?
I would. I don't necessarily see there going to be dramatic changes to increase, but a steady increase in pace is definitely palatable. I don't know how regulation could speed up, knowing the types of bodies that go into the process, being able to move any quicker.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and thank you everybody for voting on that one. And bringing you in, Linda, what types of regulatory change are being made and what challenges do different types of change present in terms of timely compliance?
Well, as we just heard, there's so many things happening, right? Whether it's driven by things happening in society, new regulatory bodies, etc. It's really, we're seeing regulatory change in all shapes and sizes, whether it's a large, refit like a mirror, or a smaller change like a change to, ESMA's files. They're coming in all different shapes and sizes, and they all fall under that umbrella of regulatory change. So you really need to kind of approach all, make sure that you're handling all of them. So the bigger implementations tend to get more of the focus. So new regulations or big changes like refits, but the smaller changes can really impact compliance as well as be more easily missed. So, reg reporting processes and technology are complex. It's like a spider web throughout the organization. So understanding, even where there's small changes can really be effective. And so I think that they're coming in all shapes and sizes, and it's not just the big ones that we need to worry about. I think it's the smaller ones as well.
Okay, Colin, coming to you as a practitioner, what do you see coming down the line? What kind of changes and what kind of impact do they have?
Yeah, I mean, I'd actually like to really echo that point from Linda there, because one of the things that we're looking at, especially with our clients in mind at the moment, is how you do manage your regulatory change across the whole breadth of your organisation. Because I think one of the biggest difficulties and one of the biggest factors that can limit companies is the fact that regulations aren't written globally; they're written very much regionally. And it doesn't always hit you in the most, likely of places where you might have a fairly mature compliance and risk, infrastructure in terms of your headquarters, or somewhere where you're domiciled. But sometimes it's your smaller satellite offices that can, as Linda said, maybe catch people out a bit more because it's maybe not a regulation that's coming across their radar. So to me, that's probably the biggest challenge, is definitely trying to look over the horizon, if you like, to see what is coming up next and how you can plan for that. I think certainly in terms of, the way that regulations are now beginning to come at us as well, and maybe echoing what Rabia said as well, things like ESG, the Capital Markets Union, for example, in the EU as well, are very much, they're kind of giving pointers, if you like, that, the regulations aren't necessarily, coming along straight away, but they're beginning to, the way that they're written and the way that some of the proposals are out there and some of the discussions and the white papers can at least begin to pinpoint where some of the regulations that will come down the line in a couple of years' time will actually hit. And that's probably one of the skill sets as well, I think, is to try and just begin to see and not predict the future, that's the wrong way of looking at it, but to try and analyse and see where those next regulations might be.
Okay, splendid. And Colin, staying with you actually, how can financial institutions keep on top of all the regulatory change on a global basis, and what sort of solutions are useful here? You've talked about the big guys, the small guys, and trying to look forward. What can they do to keep on top of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think the whole industry, the market in general, needs to try and automate this as much as possible. Again, it can be a very time consuming, very manual, very labour intensive process. I think trying to keep track of regulatory change, but that doesn't necessarily lend itself very well to keeping abreast of all the different changes that are required for any regulation, and trying to track that around your organisation. So certainly to my mind anyway, it's having some tools there that can both allow you to track the regulatory change, but also bringing into a much wider kind of, I suppose, review across your organisation and across many clients as to what is the scope of that regulation. Where is it going to actually impact? Where's it going to land within your organisation as well? Because that again will help companies and businesses to at least begin to reduce this idea at the moment where a regulation kind of hits us. And then it's very much a bit of a scramble to try and understand, well, who's actually in scope in that, and kind of everyone's in scope until you've ruled yourself out, that type of thing as well. So to try and be able to analyse and pinpoint a lot more and target exactly where that regulation will impact within an organisation, I think is going to be very key as well, because that will help us all to be a lot more efficient, to be actually a lot more timely as well in addressing regulatory change, because I think that's probably whenever regulation comes along, it's the first thing that everyone looks at is that implementation deadline. So unlike other projects where you might be able to work up to it, that's very much you've got to almost work back from that deadline as to what do we need to do in the 6 months, the year, or however long we've got to do it, and how do we do that in the most efficient manner. So I think any tools that can help a company to do that and then track that change through the organisation is definitely got to be an absolute boon for any of us looking at regulatory change at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, what would you say here in terms of tools that people can use to help them?
Yeah, so I mean, having the right intelligence, not just on the regulation, but the theme driving the regulation before it even gets to regulatory bodies is certainly, something that's very useful. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on, we'll say in Brexit, for example, but there were, 2 to 3 years before that, where you could understand where things were heading, and monitoring it along the way before it gets there will help you start to devise your strategies. Many of the content providers that we work with, do have this regulatory notifications across, the whole horizon, from conceptual through enforcement. So, we certainly, encourage that to certainly, augment your own system, but then they provide a lot of augmented information to help understand where should it be routed, what's the scope, trying to, demystify the legalese that's going to be going into this. Many organizations also have a lot of interest groups that work on helping to, inform and formulate the actual regulation itself. But then from an operational perspective, taking a best practice approach to measure impact from a couple of different areas and having some proven mitigation strategies for each of those types of risks is definitely helpful.
Okay, thank you. And moving on, let's see how the regulators are playing in this one. Linda, how much help are you seeing coming from the regulators, and how is this going to help our industry? Will it sort of ease the burden slightly? How are you seeing this? You've got your mute thing on, Linda. Can you?
Of course.
Great.
I didn't want you to hear my barking dogs in the background. Just like the rest of us, I think the regulators have had to increase their levels of expertise in data and data management because of how much more data is playing a big role in compliance. And so it's not just the industry having to, send greater amounts of data to the regulators, but it's the regulators having to turn that data into something that makes sense in order to see the value of the regulation. And so due to this, I actually think the regulators have a more empathetic approach to some cases which they're dealing with, because they're facing the same challenges that the rest of us are having to manage as well. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but certain things, are apparent, and especially in the world of standardization. I think they have a greater appreciation for standardization. If we look at MiFID, for instance, ESMA, needs to track all those trading volumes for certain derivatives, for instance. But how can they do that if all the firms are classifying derivatives differently? And I think it really pushed them to release the RTS2 classifications, right? So that everybody is starting to align, because all of a sudden they're getting all inconsistencies and when they're trying to do their job as a regulator. So I think that there's a greater appreciation from the regulator for standardization and data access, so that what they're getting back that they have to ingest is not garbage. And so I think little things like that, if they keep happening, it will hopefully streamline things for the industry and perhaps relieve a little bit of the burden currently felt by firms. Anything that falls under the umbrella of standardization is a good thing. And from our, interactions and what we're seeing, it feels more and more like the regulators are appreciating that.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Maria, what would you say here in terms of where the regulators are meeting the industry?
I think I'd agree with Linda, actually. And I think data is a good example of having a lot of pragmatism around that. But also there's a real recognition that this is a time of economic recovery. And so you've seen some moves around pausing or delaying deadlines to allow firms to catch up in what has been essentially a time of crisis. You also see in the FCA's business plan 2021 to 2022, there was a lot of talk of innovation and competition and how innovation and competition really benefit consumers. And so when you put that all together, the recognition of the need for economic recovery and also not wanting to stifle competition and innovation, you can really see how there's a genuine desire there to be pragmatic and not create unnecessary burdens. There's also an example of regulators being really directly helpful in terms of reducing burdens on the industry and on the firms they regulate. So the FCA, I think it was earlier this year, went to the Supreme Court with an application to make sure that small businesses were able to get their pandemic-related insurance payouts. So I think the FCA is, to that extent, really going above and beyond and doing everything that they can to remove any unnecessary burdens, particularly in light of what's going on.
Okay, that's great. Fantastic. Let's take a quick pause here, because I do have some questions for you from our audience. And let me ask this one to you, Jamie. It's touched on what we were talking about. It's about horizon scanning. And it says, how accurate is horizon scanning? Do we need two sources or an external and an internal function to make sure we are on top of all the changes? Horizon scanning, great term. What does it really mean? And do you need to have a sort of multiple source to make sure you're getting everything?
I've not seen the approach to have multiple sources. Usually the content providers that we've been working with do a lot of that analysis up front to understand all of the key pieces of information you need to understand what's coming when it's a concept, once it is in a draft phase, once it's become a final rule, and then once it's moved on to enforcement. So, certainly I can understand that concern, but from the most part, the providers that we've worked with really take care and give you that accurate information that you need.
Okay, thank you for that. And another one, I think this one may be for you, Colin. It's difficult in its own way. It asks, please would the panel advise on how we can track and manage different interpretations of regulatory change in different jurisdictions? And if anybody wants to jump in after Colin, please just let me know.
Yeah, that's almost spooky, because I was just about to respond back on Jamie's response there as well, because yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Jamie's right. You don't need to have, I don't think, multiple sources. That's really what the vendors and the data, the data providers should really be scrubbing, and this is publicly available data, if you like. But the biggest challenge is the interpretation piece. And that's the piece actually that it will either tax everyone's minds of some very, very experienced people within your organisation, because it does tend to be that you need your legal people, your risk people, your compliance people. But what's often forgotten about as well is that you really need your business side of the organisation to get involved in those discussions as well, because we can all try to interpret what does that regulation mean, but if you can't understand then how it impacts your business, then everyone's still a little bit lost, and we're still wasting quite a lot of time. So trying to get to the bottom of the interpretation absolutely is a paramount importance. I think in terms of what can make that easier, what I would say is definitely get the business involved as early as possible in those discussions, so that you don't just have maybe a kind of almost like a legal interpretation. I think in terms of what can help in looking at innovation as well, and talking about how how some of the regulators can innovate, I think that kind of I guess nirvana maybe of having regulations written in much more kind of more machine readable text, and maybe more standardized fashion, if that's the right word to say, would also help all of that as well, and help the market in general get to do exactly what is the nub of that regulation, and where is it trying to hit, and then potentially there is even some thoughts around, could you have some market collaboration around it as well? Because I think you quite often do find with regulations that eventually it will be maybe an industry body, a working group that's pulled together certain players within the financial services industry that kind of put their heads together, if you like, and and I wouldn't call it the herd mentality, but you would say that it's kind of getting a consensus of, well, what does that really trying to say, what's it really trying to mean, and maybe what could help as well going forward is eventually that there's a way of being able to sort of maybe play that back to regulators as well. I think that's still probably not a topic that many companies want to do, because it always may appear that you don't know quite what you do, but maybe there's an opportunity going forward for people to actually be able to say, look, this is where we think you're trying to get to. This is what we this is the areas that the regulation is trying to pinpoint. Can we just can we check our understanding, or can we even maybe say this potentially is a better way of doing it? Because I think in financial services in general now, let's face it, we all know that regulations are here to stay, absolutely for the good. So I think it's for incumbent on the whole market infrastructure to try to work together now to improve it. And as Rabia said as well, following the pandemic, we're all in some fairly straightened economic position, and so anything that can help us drive down the costs of regulatory change as well has got to be a good thing.
Okay, Rabia, is that something that you work on as a law firm, helping companies with regulations being interpreted in different jurisdictions in different ways?
Absolutely. And for my sins, I'm a solicitor in the UK and also an attorney in New York. So there are occasions where we're looking at, what the FCA thinks something should be defined as, and then what the SEC defines that same thing as. And this happens with conventional products as well as new products. So one of the big discrepancies I was giving a legal opinion on the other day was around whether something does or does not constitute a security for the purpose of the Securities Act in the US. and then whether it would constitute the equivalent here in the UK for the regulation here. And I think the more harmonization we can get, particularly amongst the major financial centers across the world, the better. But going back to the initial question asked, I agree, the variation in taxonomy between different jurisdictions and even sometimes between the different regulations within the same jurisdiction is a major issue, and it always has been, really.
Right, so more harmonization, but it's never going to end.
No, it's not.
Yeah, sure. And Linda, coming to you, you talked a little bit about working with regulatory bodies to sort of try and ease the burden. The question sort of reviews that a little bit and says, where does the panel see most regulatory interest in working with the market on reg change? Why is this, and how do we get involved?
So I'm in the data space, right? That's my world. So we've been mostly involved in that and the SI collaboration for the SI registry. And so again, I go back to my original point about data quality and understanding the importance of data. We just see a huge, the regulators seem very open to putting that as a priority because they understand the impact that, poor data has within their organization, but also within the industry itself. And I guess just to circle back on what was just being said. So if you have the interpretation, the regulator has their version of the interpretation, right? Each firm, if you have the legal department, can have their interpretation, but actually implementing it into practice is a whole nother level interpretation, right? So you can have lots of teams in agreement, but then if the technology team, for instance, that's implementing the interpretation that the firm has, across our products, I would say there's not one client that does things the same way, right? They've all have their little interpretation twist here or there, and they've implemented the regulation a little differently. So I think that just circling back to the other question, that I think that the interpretation has to be consistent all the way through the organization, not just at the, even that business, as Colin said, the business needs to be involved. And then whoever's giving the instructions to the people building your automation need that interpretation to be clear as well. But yeah, I think we're very happy that the regulators are really understanding that impact of data and how, to automate and make this real and make compliance real, that the data needs to be clean. So that's where personally I've had the most experience with the regulators as far as their openness to improve internally. And I think that the collaboration, I think somebody said collaboration, maybe Colin, the collaboration piece of it, they're appreciating collaborations, right? They're appreciating the industry groups that are coming together and giving their advice, or the APA is coming together and the SI registry collaboration. That's appreciated because they know that all of those things help to lead to better compliance.
Okay, and the end of the question was, how can people get involved? Do they just knock on the regulator's door, or do you have to jump through different organizations before you reach the regulator?
I'm going to be very open that when we first started out on our journey, our MiFID journey from a product perspective, there was a very time-consuming process when we would submit questions and get back answers. Now that has become much more streamlined. We feel like the support has really, really increased, even through the regular channels of help desks and everything else at the we mainly deal with the FCA and ESMA, and I would say that both are over the last year and a half maybe have gotten much more quick to answer and engaged with the industry.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you for your questions to our audience, and thank you for your answers. And coming back to you, Colin, how do you see best practice approaches that can help firms achieve a more holistic regulatory change management? As you said, we've also it's fairly fractured in many places. There is a need for this kind of harmonization. How can firms approach this?
Yeah, I think it's echoing a lot what's been said already, and who'd have believed it that data is now sort of king all over again. I worked in data operations and data governance and data around regulations for many years as well. It's taken a long time knocking on people's doors to say that I think this is quite important. Absolutely, now it's the data control and data quality. If we're talking about best practice, is making sure that is absolutely watertight. You have data owners, you have data stewards. You also understand the data sets that are required for regulations. So, they can, despite the fact we've been talking about how differently regulations are written, you can begin to pick out from your own systems, some common sets of data that will be required, because, it's quite often identifiers, that type of thing, you can, pull into maybe a sort of a data repository or a central data strategic service that multiple projects can then use, because I think that is a very good practice as well to get involved with. I think again we're talking about trying to look further forward as well. So let's try and stop being tactical. I think again, maybe when regulations first started, the first wave hit us all, we were just trying to manage it tactically. It was just getting over the line, somehow making sure that we were compliant, or at least trying as much as possible to comply with that regulation. But it didn't lend itself very well for a strategic view. So I think now any good practice is to definitely look what's coming over the horizon, try and understand where that is going to land in the next 2, 3, 5-year plans. Beginning to understand, right, okay, these are the data sets we're going to need, or more than likely going to need. These are particular systems we might need to look at in terms of the impacts. I think obviously the digital revolution is going to help with that to some extent, but I think there's an awful lot of legacy systems still within financial services, so that still has to be overcome. But I think if we can begin to look over the horizon a bit more, because that also helps with the whole end process as well, because I think in terms of best practice in my experience as well across different organizations, it's quite often the last point is to suddenly realize, we need to demonstrate how we've complied with this regulation. Now we've done a great program, we've done multiple work streams, and then everyone sort of runs around at the end trying to work out, well, how should we actually demonstrate that we did do what we did, and we did tick all the boxes and we are complying with the regulation. So it's to try and get a kind of, I suppose, more of a straight through seamless process around that, right from where you've taken on the regulation, you're understanding the regulation, and then you're beginning to show how you're going to demonstrate how you're going to comply with that regulation. And then also, not last but not least as well, how you're going to report on that regulation as well. That is, again, something that we help our clients with, across the board really is, don't wait until the last minute to understand, well, how do we report on this regulation? Try and build on that and look at it, up front, because actually the same data that you're going to take on board to understand the regulation, you can also use then to report on the regulation at the end as well. So take that all the way through your processes and your systems as well.
Okay. Linda, what would you say there in terms of sort of holistic regulatory change management? I remember 5, 6 years ago, we started to talk about harmonization across regulations and the problem with tactical stuff and everything like that. We're still talking about it. How can people make it better still?
Yeah, I think that we can no longer, a couple of years ago, you built out your budget and your roadmap for your work in the following year based on when a regulation was going to go live. So if a big regulation was going to go live, it went in your roadmap. I think that we have to consistently block out a chunk of budget and roadmap, because it's not these one-hit big wonders anymore. Every year there's new guidance that comes out. There's a little tweak here, there's a divergence between FCA and ESMA, whatever it is, you're going to have some work to do in the regulatory space. So you can no longer say, okay, I don't have any big regulations this year, I'm going to ignore regulation. I think to put it a chunk of devotion towards regulation every year is how you're going to keep regulatory change and your organization healthy going forward. And then the other thing, which we've been beating up a lot, and it's coming through, I think, from all of us, is the coordination of the team. So best practices is to make sure that everybody has a voice when it comes to implementation of regulatory change at a firm. So you're not just dealing with one team. I mean, there are, a change could come along and compliance could review it and say, this has nothing to do with us. But the change could mean that a data feed coming into your organization is changing. And if you don't do some kind of development work, your existing functionality is going to blow up, right? And if you don't have both teams at the table, then you're going to be in trouble, even with the things that are applicable to your organization. So I would say the two things is make sure you dedicate every single year a chunk of budget and resources to regulatory change, because even if it's not on the calendar yet, it's going to be, something's going to pop up. And then the other thing is to make sure that you have everybody at the table, which we've been saying, I think all of us have been saying. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And let's dig a little bit deeper, and I'm going to come back to you, Colin, to talk a little bit about the knock-on effects of regulatory change in terms of the associated controls, risk management and policies, and how these issues can be managed, because I think sometimes they're not instantly seen.
Yeah, first of all, I was going to invite Linda onto our capital planning committee, actually, because that was perfectly put about how we can get regulatory budget. So fantastic, but absolutely, totally right, Linda, all the way through. Now people can't just plan that there's regulations are going to happen, and it'll be definitely this date. There's lots of things that happen intra during the year now as well that you have to take account of. So that's a really good point. And it kind of leads to, I suppose, my answer on this one as well, is that it is the socialization of regulations as well. It's how you get, your risk functions, your control functions, your compliance functions, and your business all pulling in the same way, because I think that's absolutely crucial as well. And it depends on some of our client base. Sometimes those people are one and the same, so someone might be doing all 3 or 4 of those jobs, which must be quite difficult when you get regulations as well. But in terms of even larger organizations, you need to be able to socialize that particular regulation, understand definitely where it's going to impact you. And then I think it's very much sort of having some strong governance processes around it as well. So it's going to be, I think in terms of not just traditional project management, all the good practices around that as well, but it's having the governance to understand, that we have captured everyone, we have ticked all the boxes, and that all the teams that could be impacted have been brought into that conversation. Because I think we've all probably been in positions where it's right at the last minute, suddenly someone will realise, there's a team that hasn't been told about it, needs to do something, has some actions on that. So it's how you manage to keep all of those people in the loop, but also make sure that they are responding back. They're coming back on actions, they're coming back to say, yes, I've got, I'm aware of what this regulation is going to be, I'm already beginning to tackle it, that type of thing. And then massively, again, talking around the communication front, it's also beginning to talk across your across your organization, across different lines of business as well. So it's understanding, what are the knock-on effects, if you like, and collaborating together. Because I think quite often as well, within fairly large institutions, you can sometimes find that you may have 3 or 4 different teams possibly looking at the same regulation, but just from different angles. So it's how do you bring them together? How do you get them to work together, collaborate together, share sort of resources, share some of the communications. And last but not least as well, if we're talking about how you manage that regulatory change, is definitely talk to your clients a lot more, early in the process as well. Sometimes, quite often, those regulations will mean that there might be something different that you need to do with the clients. There might be some different way that you need to contract with them. or even just a different way that they might have to process this as well. So it's very, very crucial to talk to your clients as early as possible in the whole process as well, to make sure that they are aware of what's coming up. If you need to turn, to change terms and conditions, or just change, practices or processes, you're giving them that time, and you're also giving the chance for them to come back and ask questions and everything else. So I think that's massively crucial, as well as that sometimes I guess regulation has this effect on us all, I think, to the fact that we really need to make sure we are complying with a regulation. But guess what? There's a whole ripple effect out there as well, and those clients and people outside your organisation also need to be brought into the bigger picture as well. So that's an absolutely crucial part of the process.
Okay, thank you. Coming over to you, Jamie, I know you work in this area. How would you help people sort of see what needs to be done as part of all these ripple effects inside and outside the firm?
Yeah, so I would say I'm a big process person. So anytime you can move from a reactive approach to a proactive approach, the better. There's obviously some cost associated with that, but the benefits tend to outweigh the costs. And the reason is that this allows you to better focus and articulate successful strategy for your policy development, your control implementation, and just overall managing risk, which, by the way, is not always eliminating it, but just managing it to align to your organization's risk appetite. A lot of what's been said before about the collaboration, part of that is understanding, yes, there's regulation and there's something you need to do about it, but there are also costs associated with it. And then there's, penalties and other reputational damage that all has to be weighed out. And sometimes the response is no response, sometimes. But at least you have a process for, vetting that out and coming to that conclusion, and everyone collaborating together to come to that. And it wasn't just a top-down decision, it was a collaborative decision. This is the heart of what we're starting to see a lot more now, which is resilience, not just having a plan for what could happen, but monitoring what is coming, not just what's happening right now. So as we move forward, we're helping to look at providing creative strategies for mitigation, sharing data across customers that proves that they thought about this, and there's some information that you can also glean for your organization. So those are some of the knock-on effects that I see.
Okay, splendid. Thank you very much indeed. And let's run another audience poll. This time, the question is, what types of emerging technologies does your organization use or plan to use to support regulatory change management? Now, this time you can tick as many boxes as you like. So while you do that, let me come back to Jamie to talk a little bit about the kind of technologies, tools, solutions, and services that are available and emerging for change management.
Yeah, so certainly we see several organizations still out there managing this whole process with spreadsheets and office tools, and it's just simply too big and too fast for that. The data scraping alone, as Linda's team will probably attest to, is more than a full-time job. I know I actually did automate those types of processes at a former company 15 years ago. And this area is ripe for robotic process automation, but data providers like Linda they're already taking care of a lot of that. Moving forward, you start to see the augmenting of raw data to provide some interpretation information or some applicability information, the scope, and digesting requirements into really actionable things, which is very helpful for an organization to move quicker, or at least plan quicker, and get to what is the plan, or what is the strategy we're going to use once this becomes enforceable. So we'll see a lot of natural language processing to make recommendations about applicability, either from the data provider side or even on the tool side. Is something that that we can certainly get into, so it gets routed to the correct departments for further analysis and collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Linda, what do you see here in terms of useful technologies?
Yeah, I think so I agree with Jamie, and I think the reg tech area right now. Industry is just exploding, and there are so many useful tools out there that have a very broad range. The solutions I think that make the most sense are the ones that bring together the combination of technology and human expertise, and kind of, couple it together can really bring in efficiencies into organizations. I see very good regulatory mapping tools that help to understand the implications of the regulation, and data access tools. So again, back to the data, which is my world, the use of APIs are becoming much more widespread. It really takes the burden off of firms to manage really large sets of data. And the key for regulatory data is that it means that they can react to regulatory changes a lot faster. Because they have an easier means to onboard and get access to the data. So we see that. And then as for data content, nothing is straightforward when it comes to these reports and reporting. So across most reporting, there's a lot of data derivation that needs to take place. And so, you see that the data service providers, such as ourselves and others, can really help firms alleviate the burden of maintaining all the complex derivation rules. And so I see a heavier reliance, and that brings into, part of that discussion is machine learning, et cetera, and so forth, that even the data providers are really relying on more and more. But, at times it could get complex. You have attribute A that you have to report, and it takes 6 fields to derive attribute A. And then regulatory change comes around and guidance comes out, and then those 6 fields now turn to 8 fields because there's more that you need to look into. And so being able to use these tools to more efficiently bring in all of that change and not have it disrupt within an organization's regulatory framework, which could include, as Colin said, some legacy systems, et cetera, and so forth. So to be as least disruptive as possible by using a lot of these tools, I think really brings in the efficiencies, and we'll continue to build on that.
Okay, may we see the poll results? And Linda, would you like to comment on these?
On the poll results, so regulatory intelligence. I think that we all, the smarter we can make our machines, the better. And so I understand that. Artificial intelligence, I think Jamie and I both mentioned some machine learning, which goes through this whole, the last. So this is all, every answer really is around building in more intelligence into our processing, which I completely agree with.
Okay, thank you for that. And thank you everybody for taking part in the poll. And Linda, actually staying with you, you mentioned third-party service providers. How do you see this going? Obviously, with a lot of data, some firms want to work with other parties. How does that work? And what is best in terms of using third-party services?
Yeah, it's funny because the word collaboration has come up so much today, but I'm going to use it yet again because I think that you will get the most out of your third-party relationships when it comes to regulatory reporting and all the tools involved with good engagement. And so you really need to, when it comes to regulation, because a firm is ultimately responsible for that reporting, whether you're integrating a number of third-party service providers or not, you need to treat the third party like it's a partner or part of your organization to a large degree. And so I really look, for third-party service providers who offer subject matter expertise. So it's not, an out-of-the-box solution where the regulator comes knocking on your door and you can't really tell them why you reported something or why the data looked a certain way at a certain time. If you have that collaborative relationship with your third-party provider, then those answers are much easier to provide to the regulator. Like I said earlier, we have no 2 clients that have attacked the regulation in the same way. So each firm has a different approach, and assessing the market to understand all the third-party services that are available. Like I said, RegTech is just exploding at the moment. So I think that if you have a third party already, then you need that collaboration and that really close relationship so that you can answer the questions. If you don't, and you have challenges, then it's really worth the time and effort to go out there and take a look at all of the tools and services that are available, because there are a lot. And some firms are big, it's the buy versus build. Some firms are really focused on building, and they want to build their whole solution themselves. However, there's little challenges. So, finding that niche third-party provider that can provide that little bit that will help you drastically, even though you've built most of the solution, it's possible now. There's that many solutions out there. So whether you're somebody who's going to buy a more complete product offering, or somebody that is looking for something to just kind of plug a need in your organization, it's worth the time and effort to go out there and look at all the services and tools that are available to you, because it's such a growing sector, and you can really build in some efficiencies by doing that.
Okay, so coming to you, Colin, from a practical perspective as a practitioner, how does that work with third-party services and things that
I think absolutely. There's lots of very good solutions and companies now in that RegTech space that's been growing and growing over the years. I think that does then lend itself actually to, it's probably harder actually to find the right solutions to meet your particular requirements, because there is such a broad landscape now. So the actual whole process of deciding on who to partner with has become probably more complex. Certainly within our own organisation, we have a partnerships team that we will work with, and it's also enabling the integration of those tools as well. And I think the crucial factor, that all of those tools that are out there in the market, without a doubt, the data is going to be key to how those tools still operate. Those solutions don't have the data that will really enable them to become more intelligent. Because I'm going back to the poll results about the regulatory intelligence, which I was very pleased and gratified to see that came out top. That's something that we've been working with and exploring ideas around. Yes, helping our clients beginning to understand what are the regulations that are coming down the pipe. But it's not just then throwing lots of data at them. It's trying to establish and utilize the knowledge that we have around clients. So obviously, we have many clients, and we have an understanding of what markets they're in, which jurisdictions they're in, in terms of, just being able to see their holdings and their transactional patterns. And so what we've been looking at is sort of turning that round and seeing if we can utilize that information to actually provide much more targeted regulatory updates, so that it's not just a kind of still everyone having to interpret everything and trying to work out whether they're really involved or not, but it's giving them a better chance to maybe understand a bit more succinctly that they will be impacted by regulation because they're trading in a certain market, or because they've got a satellite office in a particular country, that type of thing. So it's beginning to kind of drill down a lot more. So regulatory intelligence, very it's good to see that was top of the poll, because that's certainly something that without a doubt we're looking to try and help our clients with over the next year or so, and how you can best integrate those tools into your organization is probably the other major factor about working with third-party service providers. And also, as I said before, maybe just making sure that you're not just utilizing a tool that might look good on the surface, but maybe doesn't actually do or get you anywhere towards understanding your regulatory burden or complying with regulations as well. So that's very important.
Okay, thank you. And coming back to you, Rabia, can you talk us through a little bit of an example of a successful deployment of regulatory change and the benefits that can be delivered beyond compliance?
We see benefits going beyond compliance pretty much every day, but a good example of this would be, we do a lot of work with clients, international businesses, whether it's banks, investment managers, insurance, a few tech companies as well, where they are seeking to come into this market and get authorized here. And so that usually triggers a large-scale regulatory review, analysis, and then essentially a regulatory change project. And in doing that, I'm finding increasingly that clients will ask for us to take a really broad lens approach and look at really wide regulatory risks. So not just your, again, classic conduct of business, prudential, but also really dive into the data, which I know Linda will be happy about, but also risks around some of the other areas that you wouldn't normally expect to cover. And so the ancillary benefit that we see is that we will end up picking up on risks and issues that they may not have been aware of, and potentially averting some sort of scandal or reputational crisis a year down the line because it's been picked up in advance. And then other, I suppose, more direct examples as well. We had a client recently where we were advising on the different rules around billing and commission and the way fees are shared between, it was 2 banks. We're advising one of them. And we actually worked out that for once, our client was not charging enough to their customers. And so that was probably the fastest I've ever seen a client move to remediate a gap. Straight away, normally you have to persuade them a little bit to remediate. Straight away they closed it off. So you do, there are a lot of benefits like that, which crop up, which go well beyond just being able to say that you're complying, but actually translate into real revenues generating or saving benefits.
Lovely, thank you. Jamie, do you have a similar or different even example?
Yeah, I mean, many of the clients that we have are in financial services, banking, and insurance, and their IT teams, legal teams, they're busy with so many activities, and so for us to partner with data providers to reduce the efforts, certainly allows them to focus their valuable resources, elsewhere, in much more value-added areas. The ability to support them with a consistent process, from turning regulatory concepts into action, really just speaks to having them become a lot more resilient and reducing, their risk. And then lastly, the ability to provide metrics all around the change management program and make it more measurable allows them to, better demonstrate how compliance risk fits into their broader view of enterprise risk and better decision making.
Okay, excellent. And we are coming close to time. So that's our last item for today. Let me ask our speakers what guidance they would give to people working in the space of regulatory change management. So Jamie, would you like to kick off on that one? Sure.
So look early and often at your regulatory intelligence, wherever that might be coming from. Measure what you're doing today. So that you may measure, return on investment and time to value if you do decide to, allow for some technology enablement and digitization. And big mantra with SAI 360 is, think big, but start small. We have a wealth of different risk management solutions across a number of different terrains. And, one thing that they want to do is buy it all, but you really need to have a plan for showing some iterative wins early and often.
Okay, Linda, what would you say?
Back to that word collaboration, but make sure that all the internal teams are talking to each other when evaluating regulatory change, and that includes your third party. Subject matter expertise, invest in subject matter expertise internally and externally. And then lastly, be proactive. I'm in agreement with Jamie, like get ahead of it. Assume regulatory change is coming each year when planning your budgets and roadmaps. Don't just plan for the big ticket items, and ensure that your control framework is in place to monitor for change, but also advanced enough to catch issues when things fall through the cracks, because they are going to fall through the cracks. So that risk mitigation.
Okay, lovely. Rabia?
I would say keep an eye on what's going on in other jurisdictions, and there's a couple of reasons for that, really. So firstly, if you look at other major financial centers and regulators, sometimes you can see themes where they mirror each other. So it can help to keep an eye on what's coming out of the SEC, or maybe what's coming out of MAS in Singapore, and you can maybe see what's coming down the road. And then the other reason to do that, I think, is now more so than ever before, it's so easy to through digitization skip between different jurisdictions if you're playing the markets. So there's a real risk of regulatory arbitrage. So I would say definitely keeping an eye on other jurisdictions, beware of the lack of harmony in taxonomy, be prepared for it. We touched on that earlier. And then lastly, I think review everything in light of the big shifts that we're going through, not only in the industry, but in terms of how we live. Really good example of that is how payments have become fully electronic now. Everybody's using electronic payments. So some of the regulatory controls that would have been designed for the old world maybe won't capture and mitigate the risks that apply in the new world. So it's worth sort of doing a review of all those controls now.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there for now because we really are running out of time at this point. So thank you all. And thank you to SmartStream and to SAI 360 for sponsoring today's webinar. It's been a very interesting conversation. Before we close up, just a few A-Team Group items that may be of interest to you. If you scroll down your screen to additional options, you'll see that you can download A-Team Group's latest regulatory data handbook and our ESG handbook 2021. You can also access A-Team Connect, a new and powerful immersive professional platform that you can use to deliver highly effective and interactive events and webinars of your own. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Linda, Rabea, Jamie and Colin, and thank you to all of you who have taken part in the webinar. Please complete our feedback form as we're keen to hear your views and improve our products. Thanks again and goodbye.